Hey, before we begin the show, I want to thank everybody for supporting the After Action Review podcast the way that you guys have. It's been fantastic. So far, so good, but I still need more subscribers on YouTube. So check it out. Click the link below, go to YouTube, and subscribe to the AAR Podcast YouTube channel. Okay, that way we can get the AAR Podcast name and the address. Right now it's youtube.com/blah, blah, 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 a bunch of gibberish. I want to change that to youtube.com/the AAR podcast. The only way I can make that happen is with your support. So please go to YouTube and subscribe. Another way you can help, share the links. So this episode, please share it with your network, share it with your friends, put it on other pages. Let's spread the AAR podcast message. And it's all about veteran entrepreneurs, veteran small businesses, veterans who are trying to go out there and make that side hustle, make that side grind a real thing, make it big. So by supporting this podcast, you're supporting every veteran-owned business that comes on it. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you again for all the support. Hey, how about I'm going to wrap this up now. Let's get to this episode.
And now, the After Action Review with Rod Rodriguez.
All right, welcome to this episode of the After Action Review podcast. I'm your host, Rod Rodriguez. When I was a kid, I loved comic books. All right, I grew up reading Marvel, DC, the X-Men, Wolverine, Superman. My favorite, of course, growing up was Batman. I'm a Batman person. You Superman guys? Whatever. I was all about the Batman. And I loved the stories. I loved the artwork. And there was something, I don't know, when you're a little kid, there's not a whole lot of things that you have a full mastery of understanding. And when it came to comics, you knew the stories, you knew the characters. There were things that your parents weren't quite, they might have known who Batman was, but they didn't know about all the little subtleties that come with the stories. They didn't know about some of the different villains or the bat gadgets and all these other things. And I enjoyed the drama of the stories that came with comic books. And now that we're living in the age that we are in now, where, these huge multi-million-dollar movies are out, that they're bringing my comic book heroes to life. The Marvel Universe has done an amazing job, and the DC Universe is just starting up. I can't think of a better time to be a comic book fan. So when I had an opportunity to talk to somebody in the comic book industry, that was pretty awesome. And then he's a veteran, which is even better. All right. So in this episode, I'm talking to Jon Santana of Iron Age Comics. All right. Now, Iron Age Comics is an independent comic book brand, comic book production, publishing company. And if you've ever been interested in comic books, comic book writing, guys, this is the episode for you. Even if you're just interested in writing in general, Jon is going to drop some serious knowledge for you. This is the episode for you writers out there that you've been wanting, you've been waiting for. So without any further ado, Jon Santana of Iron Age Comics. All right, I'm here with Jon Santana of Iron Age Comics. Jon, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to be on the After Action Review podcast. Jon, tell us a little bit about yourself and Iron Age Comics.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me to the show. I'm a veteran in the National Guard. I'm currently on an active mission. So I work, as many veterans may know the term ADOS. So I work on ADOS for a while. And this business I do on my nighttime schedule when I get home. And I just love to write. I always have loved to write. I went to school for screenwriting. And I always wanted to do something with that skill that I had. So I decided to write comic books because I love the medium, and I know a lot of really great artists. I just happen to be lucky like that. I just know some really, really great talent out there, some great pros. So that's what I do. I just write comics, and I make stories, and I publish them, self-publish, and there's a whole process that we can get into in a bit. But basically, the nitty-gritty of it is I self-publish my own comics online, Comixology. I print paper copies like this copy of Everhound's right here, and I bring them to conventions with me and do the show circuit as much as I can. So that's it in a nutshell.
So one of the things that I encounter a lot are entrepreneurs who want to create art, whether they're singing, or they're artists or the visual artists or writers. This is something I run into a lot. And one of the things for them is I don't know how to start. I don't know how to put my art out there. And you seem to have kind of figured that out.
Well, yeah. The best way to do it, especially for writers of any kind, really nowadays, is self-publishing. As a matter of fact, the industry has changed so much to where there's independent publishers. Let's talk comics. Independent publishers, which used to be your way in to like the big publishers, Marvel, DC, the publishers people know. But now there's a subcategory of independent publishing called self-publishing, right? So it's almost expected that you start your own project, you take it off the ground, and if you get noticed, and if you sell copies, then some of these small-time publishers may pick you up. So that's a way in for a lot of artists and writers in the comic book industry to make their own comics and then try to work their way in. I think I might have taken it a step further in not just making my own comics, but creating my own comics company. I have several comic properties, several intellectual properties that we're working with. I have a book called Everhounds, a book called Jaded. I have an online book called The Wordsmith, and I have another project coming up called Dark. So those are all written by me, work done by different artists, and I'm looking to actually start my own publishing company, hoping soon to be able to hire new writers and new artists. But that's just another way in. The bottom line is you want your property out there in the industry, available to read for as many people as possible.
Now, what compelled you to take that extra step? Why didn't you just kind of go the traditional route and try and get hired on to like a Marvel or a DC or maybe even a smaller company? Why take the extra step?
Freedom to write what I want to write what I'm interested in. The artistic freedom to choose. It's important to me. And that is important to a lot of young artists, starting artists as well. But a lot of people are willing to write whatever for whoever. And I'm not saying that I'm not. I'm not saying that I'm not interested in someday writing for Marvel or DC, but I really want to be able to focus on what I can control, especially with the schedule that I have. It's very difficult on a full-time work schedule when you've got kids and everything to work on somebody else's timeline. So if my goal is to make comics and I can't chase a job writing comics for a smaller independent company, well, then I can build my own schedule and make my own comic books. And I've got lots of training in writing, and I've worked with artists who are pros, so they've got lots of training. So we're producing professional quality, just at a different schedule. Speaking of schedule, this is a really interesting tip for aspiring writers and artists. If you want to make your own comics, if you're not ready to release, let's say you have a 3-issue series that you want to write. If you're not ready to release the 3rd issue, don't release the 1st. And the reason for that is because if you're working on a part-time schedule like I was, you're not going to be able to keep up with even the independent companies that release on a monthly schedule. You can't do it, right? So before you're going to advertise it, make sure you have the whole thing ready. That's a really good tip that I learned the hard way, where I released Jaded #1, for example, and then a year went by before Jaded #2 I was able to publish, and I lost a lot of readership because of that. So I've learned to collect as much product as I can, make sure it's as complete and I have enough in the bag before I start again. It's a really good tip.
And that's an important piece. That's an important tip, because I think that's something that might go contrary to some of the advice entrepreneurs get when it comes to manufacturing or an item or even some type of software. They always say like, hey, get the prototype out there, man. Get it out there on the market as soon as you can, even if it's not perfect, and you'll make adjustments. But it sounds like it's a different situation when it's writing.
I'm glad you said it, because the product at the end of the day, the product is paper and that's what you're moving, but the real product is the content, whether it's art or writing or both. If you don't have enough of the product to sustain, customers, then you're not ready. Like you have to be ready to release on a schedule that customers are ready to receive the product in. In the comics business, we're not in the business of selling individual comic books. People have to get that out of their minds. You in this business, if you want to talk moving units, the only way that an artist or writer or publisher, independent publisher, is going to make money is when they collect a volume of multiple issues. Why is that? Because unless you are the entire team, a one-man band, if you are the writer, artist, inker, letterer, if you do it all yourself, and there's guys like that out there, and God bless them, but unless you have all that, you are going to have to pay, whether it's through Kickstarter funding or out of your own pocket, you're going to have to pay for some of those services for those guys that are working with you. And if you're going to pay for that, then no matter what you charge, no matter how little you try to charge or how much you try to charge for that individual book, the way the industry is you're not going to make enough money. You'll be lucky if you break even. Even the best in the industry in terms of independent market is barely going to break even on selling those individual issues. So the long game is really the collected volume, because you've already paid for all that art. You've already paid for all the overhead. Now all you're paying for up front is the paper product and the shipping of that paper product. So now you can turn a profit.
Right. So one of the things you just finished saying, they said before, was that you had gone to school for this. I know a lot of artists and writers who are not formally trained and feel that they are not going to be able to compete with people like you who have been trained in a more traditional way. Do you feel that training is necessary? Do you think that some of these guys should go to school for this, or is the kind of go with what you got attitude going to get them somewhere?
Well, somewhere in the middle, because no, you don't need formal training. You don't need a classroom setting. But when it comes to writing, let's say, and actually when it comes to art in general, feedback is very, very important in order to grow an artist. So in order to get that feedback, you need to rely on not just your own studies and not just you. If you're an artist, signing up for any sort of, or maybe following an artist who will show you their techniques on a live stream or something. That's one way to do it. For a writer, just practicing and learning as much as you can about the craft by reading books about writing. You can do that yourself. But you need feedback. Feedback is really important. So finding a mentor, a good mentor, somebody in the industry that you're going into that will take the time to provide you consistent feedback is maybe more valuable than traditional training. If you have somebody that you can trust and somebody who's going to be where you're going. And that's something that you can take from the military. I mean, I know the military is big on finding a mentor in your career if you're interested in moving your career forward. So that's something that works in any craft, a mentorship. So it's important if you can get it. It's an alternative to traditional training that I think is very valuable. But doing it by yourself when it comes to art, sure, it can be done, but I would really suggest finding somebody to get you some good feedback, somebody who's going to be honest with you.
That's one of the things I like about the idea of going back to school. Even if it's, like you said, even if it's for a short period of time, is that school will get you the networking. You're going to meet like-minded writers. You're going to meet instructors who might have those links to the industry that you're trying to break into, as opposed to trying to cold call your way in or, cold knock people's doors. Hey, you don't know me and I don't know you, but will you please be my mentor? That
Right.
doesn't necessarily go all that well for
Right.
your search.
Well, a really good tip then for this industry in particular, for the comics industry, is get a booth. Take what you got, print it out. If you're an artist, print out posters. If you're a writer, I don't care, print out a script if you don't have any art. The value of networking at a convention is so much greater than trying to, like you said, cold call or cold email somebody and try to get any sort of attention, a personal connection. You don't know where they're going to set you up. You can be at a booth in what's called Artist Alley, where they have all comic book artists and some writers there. Or you could be at a booth somewhere out where there's vendors. Doesn't matter. You have that vendor tag around your neck, you have an instant camaraderie with anybody in the industry. If they're too big in the industry, maybe you're not going to be able to, ask them to go out for a beer afterwards. But it depends on who it is. You could be sitting next to somebody who really wants to, take somebody under their wing, or at least offer some advice. And trust me, the value of the booth, or the cost of the booth, will cover the value at the end of the day. Now, there's smaller conventions, there's medium conventions, there's larger conventions. I wouldn't start with a booth at a big one if you have nothing to bring to the table, because there's a big cost associated with New York Comic Con, San Diego Comic Con. Start small, find a local convention, and meet who's in your area. You are going to find at a local convention anywhere in the United States who lives near enough to drive to that's in your industry, to drive to this convention. And now you found a local professional that you can maybe go grab a beer with, or just
who's going to give you that honest feedback that you're looking
right,
for.
Right. And maybe it doesn't work the first day. It doesn't work with everybody, but you should be able to connect with somebody. It's a great way to connect with professionals.
So what got you interested in writing and then comic books? Or was it the other way around?
It was both. So I was always interested in stories. I've always loved movies and film. So it was in basic training. I went to basic. I joined the National Guard. My entire 17 years of service is all National Guard. And I've done a lot of ADOS tours, and I've done a couple deployments, but at the end of the day, it's all been National Guard. So being National Guard, it's not like you're going to basic training and okay, the next 4 years of my life, this is going to be my career. It's like you're going to basic training and like, well, what am I going to do after basic? I'm only going to work 1 week in a month. And I was young, and I was thinking, well, this is great. I'm going to be a soldier, but what am I going to do after that? I had gone through community college. I didn't know what I was going to do with that associate's degree, but I knew I loved film, and there was a drill sergeant who was really pushing us to think about our future. What do you want to be? And whether in his mind he was talking about a high-ranking, enlisted soldier, maybe he was talking about sergeant major in his mind. But in my mind, I took it as, what do I want to be since I'm a part-time soldier, part-time citizen? What do I want to be? And I said, you know what? What I want to do is I want to be involved in filmmaking. I love movies. Why not? So I decided to apply for some film schools. I ended up going to SUNY Purchase and got accepted into their film writing program. And I fell in love with the writing process over the filmmaking process. I learned to love writing in that school. And I really did great. I shined. I mean, I scored better in grades in college than I ever did in my high school career in elementary school, because I was able to apply myself that much more because I loved it. I found that I loved the craft and I was really good at it. So that's why I fell in love with writing.
For some people to hear you say, I fell in love with writing, is the equivalent of saying, I fell in love with the process of doing my taxes, because it is so complicated and so monumentally challenging in the size of it. You know what I mean? Like when you talk about writing, you look at a book, and at first it's like, I can write a book, right? How hard can that be? But then you start looking at like, oh man, wait a minute. We're talking about plots. We're talking about all these characters, and how do you write? How do you put together a sentence that accurately describes what it is that's up here without visuals? And then I'm one of those people. I'm one of those guys that I thought I could write something, and then I got not even halfway. I got some words on paper, a couple of pages. I'm like, this is too much, man. Boom, gone. Right. What is it about writing that kept you interested?
I think for me, there was something in the writing process that clicked with me, because I love stories so much, and I love movies and film. I saw, I'm going to use a film analogy. I saw The Matrix, right? I could watch a movie, and suddenly, with what I was learning about the craft of writing, whether it came to books, or whether it came to comics, or whether it came to movies, I could tear it apart and see the 3-act structure, and I could see the hero's journey. It all made sense to me, and it came naturally to me. And I'm like, this is great. I can do this. And combined with the style that I found that came naturally to me, which is I really like to write rich dialogue. I like to listen to people throughout the course of my day. I mean, I grew up in the Bronx, and I used to listen to different, the way different people speak all over, and I like bringing that to life. So you take a structure, and then you apply your style to it, and you see something different and unique that's in that structure. I don't know. I just fell in love with it. So
That's awesome.
I'm sure everybody has that sense, or hopefully everybody has that sense if they want to be an entrepreneur with whatever that they have fallen in love with, whatever they're trying to create. They understand that connection. There's that moment when you realize this is clicking for me. This makes sense for me, and I see me in this process.
Tell me about the process of self-publishing, because that seems like I've seen a couple of self-published books, and it seems to me that that's where people go that are struggling or trying to find their voice. It doesn't seem like a place where mainstream is going to go to find their stuff.
You're right. You're right in that the majority of what you're going to find in self-publishing is going to be where people are struggling, learning, and so a lot of the product you're going to find you may think of as below par. Mm-hmm. That's true, because there is no standard to get into self-publishing. Where the standard comes in is what heights you reach. So when you find yourself in the company of other people who are self-published, who are starting to get signed for deals, that's when you realize, okay, I'm starting to cut it. I'm starting to rise above. But the only way to get there is to go through the bottoms, to go at entry level, which entry level nowadays for comics and even just writers is self-publishing. Working on getting a deal, working on getting an agent, all that stuff. It's not a thing of the past, but it's not the most common way in anymore. Self-publishing is the most common way in. So yeah, you've really got to separate yourself in that pool of self-publishing to rise above and make your product stand out. And that's another piece of advice I would give to comic writers who are interested in getting involved in the industry is not only do your stories have to rise above and be different and stand out, you have to pick an artist, you have to pick a team member that stands out. And a lot of times the only way to be able to afford somebody of that caliber is to go crowdfunding, Kickstarter, Patreon, something like that, to make it happen.
And how has your experience been with Kickstarters and crowdfunding and Patreon? What's your experience been with those types of fundraising? Because I've heard those can be horror experiences. Those can be nightmares.
They can be. My recommendation would be prepared well in advance of starting any one of those crowdfunding campaigns. I was lucky to have a successful crowdfunding campaign for Jaded for the first issue. I think the number was 7,000 I was looking to hit, and I came in somewhere above 7,500. So I made it. I felt like it was by the skin of my teeth. It was nerve-wracking, white knuckle kind of experience, but I made it. But at the end of the day, I found that was what I needed to fund one comic book. What I really want to do is create multiple. And the crowdfunding thing, I feel like it's something that you can't tap into over and over. It's sort of like a once in a while type of shop. So I feel one way about it where it's great to kickstart you to see how you can stand up to that sort of pressure and see if you can achieve some goals. But beyond that, you got to see what you can do without other people's money for a little while. Not that you shouldn't use other people's money. If you can grab an investor, that'd be great. But then you have to tailor your business for an investor. Really, really quick side note. So this is not a negative story, but a valuable lesson learned for me that happened on this New York Comic Con, this last one in October 2016. I had been such the mindset that I was going to chip away my way in and build my business to something big on my own. I was going to fund the money after the first Kickstarter campaign. I was going to find a way to finance it myself. I was going to own 100% of it. I wasn't going to invite any investors because I didn't want to deal with the time that it would take away from the creative process to go searching for investors. I was just going to do it myself. That was my mindset. I'm going to make it happen. Put my head down, punch through the wall. And then I'm sitting at my convention with Jimbo Salgado, the artist for Jaded, excellent artist, and Michael Oppenheimer, the artist for Everhounds on my left, and they're drawing, and we're getting some attention because we've got some quality books out, but people are coming and going. And this one gentleman comes up to the table, and without giving me eye contact, is looking down, and he says, "Hey, this is pretty professional stuff." I said, "Thanks." And then, without looking at me, he says, "Looking for an investor?" And it was like an echo. I didn't hear it at first, and then I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'm looking for an investor." Because in my head, I'm like, I wasn't prepared for this. This is awesome. This guy might be interested in pointing me in the direction of somebody who wants to give me money for the product that he's looking at. So I said, "Sure, yeah." And then he looked at me in the eye, and he goes, "What would you do if you had money?" And I'll tell you right now, I don't remember what I said, but something came out of my mouth, blah, blah, blah. And he says, "Huh, that sounds like you have a plan. I want to see your business plan. Here's my card." I won't give away his name, but I'll say that he owns a design company for women's clothing, for fashion that is worldwide. They're in Macy's, Nordstrom, Lord & Taylor. So the guy had big money. He was the CEO of the company. I looked him up, and I panicked. I panicked because I thought, whoa, this is real money we're talking about. When he asked me what I would do with money, I gave him really some BS on some ideas that have been floating around. But a real business plan, I didn't think I would need one. Mm-hmm. I'm not, trying to start my own coffee company, or I didn't think of my industry on the same level as other industries. And I'm like, sure it is. It's product. There's profit involved. There's cash flow to be had. Sure it is. So he gave me till Friday to get him the business plan, which was like 4 days. And I did not. And I said, sure, I can do that. And then I said, I never wrote a business plan. I'm a writer, right? I'm really good at writing and editing, but I didn't think about it. I'm managing my own business. Why would I need that ever, right? So I broke the deadline. I didn't make it because I never thought of writing a business plan. And when I went to the software, when I went to the online business plan, like liveplan.com, I'm not sure if you know about that one, but if there's people listening who are interested, LivePlan is a great one because it breaks down everything you need, regardless of your industry. It makes you think about your industry, take a back seat, take a look at it, break it down, everything you'll need from start to finish. So I think I created a really, really good business plan. But by the time I got it to him, it was too late. Because that guy was smart, of course. And I was one of 3 different small independent comics publishers that he gave his business cards to. And they were prepared. They had their business plans. So I was out of the game. So be prepared to take your industry or your product to the next level at all times. That's a really good piece of advice, because I can have a professional product and you can have your plan, but what if something better comes along? Are you ready for that? Yeah. I wasn't. I'll be honest, I was not ready, but I am now.
Man, that is a great piece of advice and a great story to share, especially with new entrepreneurs. I was just having this discussion the other day about this podcast. In fact, the subject of business plans has come up in other episodes. Some people are less apt to jump into a business plan, and while others are saying it's a guiding force for your business, you really want to put it together. And then I think you're presenting a third perspective of it's critical. It's important to have it for exactly those reasons of you just don't know when Uncle Moneybucks is going to show up, toss
Right.
money on the table and say, hey, if you want to play, you've got to have this business plan. You have to have this vision, and it's got to be on paper. I think the other piece of that lesson too is having your pitch down, understanding what you're about and conveying it to somebody in 2 minutes or less.
Right.
And
absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, not to cut you off, but so in this industry, so there's 2 different things. When you say the word pitch, there's 2 different things, and that's what I didn't understand that day. So in this industry, in movies, in writing books, or in writing comics, the pitch is usually the story. Mm. I'm going to pitch you what Everhounds is. I'm going to pitch you what Jaded is. And I'll do that later on the podcast. But what is Iron Age Comics? What is that? Mm. I didn't have a pitch for my business. I had to pitch for my stories because in my mind, I was trying to sell stories. I had never thought to sell my business, not necessarily sell, but invite a partner in
Right.
to my business to sell that as an idea. Why is Iron Age different from other publishers? Why is Iron Age going to work? And why is Iron Age going to make you, Mr. Uncle Moneybox, some money? I didn't have that prepared.
It's funny because one of the podcasts that I really enjoy listening to is called Startup, and it's on the Gimlet Media Network, and it's all about how Gimlet actually came to be. And you follow the CEO from day one, where he's sitting in bed with his wife, and he says, "I want to start a podcast company." And she's like, "Go for it." And now you just follow him along. And there's a point where he has to talk to his first investor, and he's trying to pitch his idea, and it's FUBAR, bro. It's terrible. It's just, you're listening to it, and he even tells you, every time I listen to this, no matter how many times I've listened to it, I cringe. I absolutely cringe inside because it's so bad. But the investor was really cool with them. He said, "Look, I need you to go and go back to the drawing board on your pitch. Go back to your drawing board on who you are." And I was going to say the other piece that I really liked about that story was the question of what would you do with money? And that's a great question because a lot of entrepreneurs, that's the thing. If there's one thing I'd have to say is the number one excuse, and I'm going to say excuse. I know there's a lot of people out there going to be like, "Well, that's not an excuse. It's a reason." It's an excuse. The number one excuse for not starting their business or not trying to start their business is, "I don't have the money."
Right.
And they want other people's money. They don't want to put their 9-to-5 money in there. They want an investor almost right away. But a lot of them can't answer.
Before proving themselves.
Yeah, before proving themselves, which is crazy in my opinion. But that question of what would you do with the money, it has to go further than, well, I'd write comic books. How?
Right.
What's your process? Like, what kind of team would you put together? I think those are a lot of questions that young entrepreneurs aren't ready to answer. And I think that 9-to-5 job, being on the grind, you're going to develop those answers. Like, wow, this is what I did with $4,000 of my own money. What could I do with $20,000 of someone else's?
Exactly. So that's where the business plan comes in too, because you can look at, well, not only does this person have a plan for what to do with the money, it involves that specific industry and how that industry works. And this person is proving that they know how that industry works. For example, a quick tip, again, for anybody, if anybody's tuning in because they want to get into comics, you might have heard of Diamond Distributors. Diamond Distributors have a government-approved monopoly on comics distribution in North America. And that is just a fact. You cannot distribute your comic nationally with any other distributor. It's just one. I won't go into the history of that, but suffice to say, if you don't go through Diamond, you're not in the comic shops unless you walk and knock on the door and sell your comic to that comic shop owner. At which case, 9 times out of 10, unless you're local, they don't care about you. They don't want to give you the time of day. They don't want to waste their time with their shelf space for your product that nobody's going to look at because they've never heard of it. Because at the end of the day, unfortunately, because of the way advertising has sort of ingrained itself in our culture, something can look good and say, "But I've never heard of it." I've heard people pick up a comic, "This looks cool, but I've never heard of it," and put it back down. And that would happen in every comic shop that you would bring your comic to if it's not in this one publisher's catalog called Diamond Distributors. If you don't know that and you're trying to get into the comics industry, you have to do research. There's just specific things in each industry that you need to know that are critical for success. And if you don't know them, that's where mentorship comes in. That's where you got to find somebody that knows and follow in their footsteps in one way, shape, or form.
So kind of going into that, it seems like there's a lot of get smart on your industry and not just about your business that has to go, that you have to actually, you got to do your homework. Are there any books or any types of references that really helped you understand the comic book industry outside of actually just immersing yourself in it?
That's a really great question. There's lots of books on how to make comics. Lots of them. Scott McCloud, if you're interested in how to write comics, the medium, the format itself, look up Scott McCloud. Alan Moore did How to Write Comics, and Alan Moore is one of the greats in the industry. But there's not a lot of how to publish besides what you can find online, what you can Google. There's no right way. When you talk to comics professionals, you'll find that everybody seems to have found their own way into the industry. There's no real right way in terms of publishing. So in order to find out, like you said, you've got to immerse yourself in the industry. Just do it. The best way to learn is to do at this point. Just get in there, try, and again, I can't say it enough. Find other people who have been there and ask them your questions, because there aren't a lot of books on self-publishing in the comics industry, because it doesn't seem to be one way that works for a lot of people. It's just multiple different avenues.
It seems like for artists in general, so how do you value your product? For artists, it seems a little more difficult than somebody who's manufacturing a widget. I could just take the cost of the price that it costs to create the widget, add 10% on that, and that's what I'm going to sell my widget for. But for an artist, it seems different, because it's my creation, it's my time that I put. How do you put a value on the time it takes for you to write, the quality of that thing? Because I don't know. I think you can look at something that you've made, two things that you've made, and say, that's better than that. How do you put value? So what's your process for putting a value or a sticker on your work?
Are you talking specifically on how much you would charge for?
Yeah, I mean, like if somebody, yeah, exactly. Like, how is there a process that you have for how you would sell your written work, and how do you value it?
Absolutely not, because it's based totally on the market. So, and that goes for artists and writers. So for a comic book itself, I cannot charge. If I put my blood, sweat, and tears, it took me a year to finish this comic, I can't charge $10 for it. I can only charge industry standard, or else nobody's going to come near it. Unless it lights up, like you plug the damn thing into the wall and the cover lights up and does something really cool, all right? You can't charge too far above industry standard, because people will scoff at it. If you charge really low as an introductory price, that'd be great. But at the end of the day, you can't charge more based on how much you feel it's worth, no matter how much time you put into it. No matter how much more you think issue 2 is better than issue 1, you got to charge the same amount. Especially on online stores like Comixology. So my comics, Jaded number 1 and 2 are on Comixology right now. Comixology.com is a subsidiary of Amazon, and what it does is it allows you on your smartphone or even on your computer to download the comic, and you swipe and it zooms into the panel. It's just an easy way to read on a device, read a comic book. It's a digital comic, but instead of reading a whole page, you read panel by panel. Cool stuff. It's called Guided View, and that's where most comics get sold nowadays, on Comixology.com. Most digital comics are sold on Comixology.com. So the product that you're receiving as a consumer is all the same. It's all a digital comic that you swipe to read. Some are better than others, but it doesn't matter. You cannot go ahead and charge any more unless you have more pages. If you have a lot more content, then you can, of course, charge more for the more content. But if I'm a comic book artist and I have art that I want to sell, that's a more pertinent question, I think, because sometimes you might have put more work into one piece of art than another. Okay. I put a lot more work into drawing this Batman with this great background, and this was a quicker sketch of Spider-Man. And so you might change the value on that. A lot of comic artists, if they're at conventions and stuff, they'll actually change prices based on how hot a character is. If Suicide Squad is coming out and I have a Harley Quinn, I'll put that front and center, and I'll bring the original with me and up the price on the original. The prints will all be the same, but you change value based on where you are and what you're trying to sell.
tell me a little more specifically about what Iron Age Comics is doing and some of the stories that you are working on, and maybe they're coming out soon.
Sure. So Iron Age Comics right now, they're all the books are being written by me. I have 4 in the works right now. Jaded, which we're on issue number 5. Issue number 4 is done, but it hasn't been distributed yet. For the same reason I told you before, I have to make sure that we're ready to go with the next one. So I'm on issue number 5 of Jaded, and I'll talk about each one. I'll give you the pitch for each one in a second, but just to describe them. So I've got Jaded, I've got Everhounds, I've got The Wordsmith, and I've got Dark. So what Iron Age Comics is simply currently it's a vehicle to get comics out there, hopefully that are a little different than what you're reading out there in the mainstream and for other independent comics. And they're high quality, professional level comics from a studio that is very small, because we take our time and we make sure that we put a lot of effort into making sure that it's good quality stuff. So more about the individual titles. Jaded is sort of like Breaking Bad for superheroes. So here, I'll give you some visuals. So this is Jaded number 1. Each of the Jaded comics, of the first 4 issues, features a different character. And the reason I say it's like Breaking Bad for superheroes is because each of them are like a superhero archetype, like a Superman or a Spider-Man archetype in this case. And they start that way, but something really, really bad happens in their life and they start going down the wrong path. So you just follow their journey into, deeper and deeper into the wrong side of heroing.
That's different.
Everhounds is sort of like so I think it was in a movie, and I wish I could remember what movie it was from. Once I heard somebody make fun of the idea of intergalactic bounty hunters, and that sounds really funny. It sounds like something over the top, and I'm like, I could totally do intergalactic bounty hunters. Why not? I want to make intergalactic bounty hunters work, so I did.
Yeah. All right.
Everhounds is about these bounty hunters that will capture anyone, anywhere, anywhen. So as long as you're willing to pay them, they will go through time and through other dimensions to get whoever you want and bring them to you. Like if you decided that you would like the head of Abraham Lincoln to put in their corner, as long as it's not in their timeline, doesn't screw up their reality, they don't care. They'll go bring you Abraham Lincoln's head.
Who let you in on my Christmas list? What's going on here?
So it's just a fun way to do some sci-fi stuff, travel through time,
right?
And then of course there's an interesting backstory in there, but that's the main idea. The Wordsmith is about the world's worst poet.
I'll be honest with you, that's the one that I started. I actually started reading that one, yeah. And that's the one that really kind of like, I got to talk to this guy. This is really cool.
Oh, I'm glad you like it. So that one, the process of writing that was really interesting too. I'll get to that in a second. But Wordsmith is basically about the world's worst poet who discovers that the poetry that comes to him in his dreams that he writes in his notebook are actually magic spells. So he's sort of reverse engineering a spell book in this series by writing down what comes to him in his dreams, discovering what they do in the real world, writing them down. And his composition notebook from the 3rd grade is his spell book. So that's what Wordsmith is. And then Dark is the new one that we don't have any art for yet. We're still working on. And that's about the end of the information age. So this is in the very near future, 2019. Suddenly all communications worldwide stop. They don't work anymore. There's no television signal. There's no phones. Of course, no smartphones, no internet. So not in a world that doesn't have, not in the 1800s. We're talking about in the 2000s, in the 2010s. What do we do when it's taken away from us? That's what that book's about. And it's sort of like a supernatural mystery. That one's going to be a lot of fun.
That sounds really good. That sounds really cool. So, in traditional AAR format, we've talked a lot about what you've done and how this process has worked for you. Can you tell me a little bit about something that has occurred in the process of building Iron Age Comics that if you could go back, you might do differently?
I hit up on it a little bit about releasing some stuff too early, not because the work itself wasn't ready, but the subsequent work was not ready. That hurt me, I think, a lot, because I was able to build a readership and a base and a following off of the work that I put out. So I knew it was quality work, but I lost the interest of that group because it took so long to release the subsequent issues. So that's why I sort of led off with that's a good piece of advice to people who are on a part-time schedule. If you can't keep up with the full-time major companies, then don't release it yet. If the industry standard is a monthly comic or a bi-monthly comic, then you got to release it that way. And if you're going to do that, then if you have issues number 1 and 2, but you know you're going to have a 6-issue series, wait till you have number 5 done in that case before you release number 1. I wish I had learned that earlier. That was kind of a real thorn in my side for a while. But I've learned from that. So I show you the printed copy of Everhounds, but I haven't released it yet because I know not to. I've learned my lesson. And that one's not going on Comixology. It's not getting released anywhere but my local shops, just to do test runs, because I want to make sure I don't make that mistake again.
So, before we wrap up the interview, do you have any parting shots for any veterans out there who are aspiring writers of anything, of any medium? They're out there. They've got pens. They've got paper. They've got motivation, but maybe they're just not ready or they don't know what to do next. What's your parting shot for them? Okay,
so 3 things real quick. 1, if you are a writer and you're just worried about the process of writing, read Story by Robert McKee. It's about film, but it works for any writing. It breaks down concepts. It breaks down structure. Of course, you have to apply your own style of writing to anything that you do. You have to make it unique and yours, but you can't do that effectively if you don't understand the building blocks of Story. So Story by Robert McKee, excellent book. For the entrepreneurship side, self-publish, test, get it out there, get feedback from fans or people who have read it. But test yourself in the waters of the self-publishing market. Very, very important. Don't be afraid to. You're only going to learn from it. And then most important of all the 3 parting shots is mentorship. Find yourself a mentor. That's not as easy as it sounds. I know it's easy to say. It's not as easy as it sounds. So find the industry, find a gathering, like a convention for writers, horror writers. Maybe if you're a horror writer, there's horror conventions for sure. Find other people who are a couple levels above you and just ping them, talk to them, buy them a coffee. It can go so... The value of it can take you so much farther than you just flailing around by yourself.
That's awesome, Jon. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time. And I got to tell you, man, this is one of those episodes that I am super happy about because you put some good info out there, man. This is exactly the kind of stuff that I'm so happy to hear and to see a fellow veteran. And by the way, I was National Guard too I've been National Guard for a couple of years now. It's so cool to see us out there breaking into these industries and we're bringing that mentality that we gained from the military, that process, that planning, the discipline. And one last thing I want to hit on that I think is really cool is you talked about early on, almost right away, you said, this is my side hustle. This is what I'm doing in addition to my normal job, my 9 to 5. I think a lot of people and a lot of entrepreneurs think, well, I just need to quit my job and just do this. And I'm like, no, man, your job is literally, that's your startup fund. That's your startup money.
Right.
And
if you're going to lose sleep, you're going to lose sleep. Do you love it or not?
I think Gary, do you ever listen to Gary Vaynerchuk by chance?
No, I don't.
Okay, Gary Vaynerchuk is talking about that all the time. He's about that side hustle, about that grind. And he says, you know what? You build your business between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. That's when you're building your business. And I think it's remarkable, and I think it's great that you brought that up. So, if you're out there and you're listening, side hustle, 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Sometimes you got to put the hours in, right?
That's when it's got to happen, man.
Jon, thanks again for being on the show, man. And I'm going to make sure all the links are available for anybody to come see you. Is there any events coming up or anything you want people to go see right away?
Just go to IronAgeComics.com and you can see everything that we're doing. On top of all the comics that we create, we also do web comic strips where I make fun of myself. I feature myself as a character, talking to my comic book characters. I even date the girl character in it. It's pretty ridiculous and hilarious. So you should definitely check that out at ironhcomics.com.
ironhcomics.com. All right, man. I will catch you later, and thanks again.
All right, thanks again. Thanks for inviting me. Take care.
All right, that was Jon Santana of Iron Age Comics. Guys, make sure you're going to this guy's website and checking out these comics. Wordsmith, it's pretty badass. I'm not going to lie. Even if I wasn't interviewing him or he wasn't supporting this podcast by being on it, I would be reading it. It's a really good story. It's really great artwork. Definitely professional, as he said. So go check it out. And listen to some of these words of advice. I think that he put out some really good info here, guys. So this is one of those episodes I would recommend. Maybe you should go listen to again and take some notes down because Jon dropped some serious knowledge in this episode. So make sure you go get it. Thank you again for supporting this episode and all the episodes. Thank you for supporting this podcast. Make sure you go to YouTube, subscribe. Make sure you're going on iTunes, leaving me a 5-star rating. Give me a review. Let me know how we can make this podcast even better for you. All right, that does it for this episode. Like, listen, subscribe, share this podcast with everybody that you know. Let's keep it going. Remember, guys, your business is grown between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. It is a side hustle. Let's use that 9-to-5 job as your startup money to make your business a reality. All right, that does it for me, and I will see you guys at the next episode.